Hello everyone, hope you're all doing well, and thank you for tuning into StopMotion. Be sure to like the video if you enjoyed the content, comment below what you think, share with your friends, and perhaps consider subscribing if you're new, and be sure you have your post notifications turned on so you don't miss any of the new content. Anyway, thank you for your support, it's highly appreciated. So during this video, I'll be drawing out a early 90s R32 Skyline, which is honestly one of my little favorite imports out there. I'm a big fan of Skylines because, well, they're really cool, to be honest, and who doesn't like Skylines? I mean, let's be honest, they're pretty wicked. I mean, for one, they're a pretty good looking car, and secondly, well, and probably most importantly, they're fast. If I were to take a personal choice, R34 is probably my personal favorite for look-wise, and, well, performance-wise, they're definitely not no slouch either, so... However, that being said, the R32 from a technical standpoint, as well as the R33, is a smaller car, so a person, if, you know, really wanted to take one of these cars very seriously, you would probably take one of those newer drivetrains and then stuff inside the, well, smaller car for, well, power to weight ratio, because ultimately that's probably the most important thing about a sports car. At any rate, I'm here to show you how to draw your very own Skyline. So essentially what we're going to want to do is start out with a light sketch and then basically work your way up from there, kind of the same way I do my sculptures, essentially just kind of making your lines a little bit more bolder so that way it sticks out a little bit more, and generally sketching it out at the beginning is the smart thing. Don't press too hard, so that way if you make a mistake you can easily erase it and it basically won't leave any weird hard lines or weird white lines when you come to color in the car later. And one other thing I also recommend is having a half decent photo reference, generally because, well, cars generally are fairly, well, there's a lot of geometry involved, for lack of a better term. So you're going to kind of, what I generally like to do is essentially just kind of outline some of the lines as I'm working. Eventually, once you get your good outline already laid down on the paper, you don't necessarily need the reference photo too much. Up until this point, well, really we don't need it anymore. Only when I start coloring is when it's going to be basically used again to help get some of those light reference points. And at the very moment, basically doing a little bit of shadowing, not much. I generally like to save that stuff towards the end because if, well, you hop on that a little too early, essentially you're just going to start smudging everything out and then it just becomes a big mess and there's a lot more cleanup than, well, is necessarily, and, well, drawing's supposed to be fun and cleaning up your smudge markings necessarily I don't find very much fun. So try to keep the shadowing to a bare minimum at the beginning. It can be handy, but just be careful where you lay it down so you don't have any issues. As always, be sure to keep your eyes peeled for Milton the Moose, and if you're the first to spot him and timestamp correctly when he shows up, you will have your comment pinned at the top of the comment section. Anyway, let's get into some coloring here. So there isn't a whole lot of commentary when it comes to coloring here, obviously, because, well, just kind of stay between the lines and try not to lose any of your fine details, essentially. What I generally like to use is Prismacolors, so there will be some blending later on, but we'll talk about that when the time comes. At any rate, what I decided to go with for a color scheme was silver and blue, because, well, honestly, one of my personal favorite cars out of the Skyline genre is probably Paul Walker's from Too Fast, Too Furious, even though Too Fast, Too Furious personally was a terrible movie. It was among the worst out of that entire franchise. At any rate, we won't get into that during this video. We're here to talk about basically the influence or the Skyline that influenced me for the drawing. At any rate, the car that is in question is R34. Yes, I obviously know that. This is R32, not the same. However, I decided to kind of go with a concept that this is like a baby version of that car, so to speak, seeing how this is an R32. So we're going to go with silver and blue and just a little bit of striping on the side to kind of implement that this isn't, well, the full version comparison to, well, the R34, which has a lot more decals, obviously. And, well, personally, that was kind of a bit ricey and a little bit more time area appropriate for back then, perhaps not so much now. Let me know in the comments below, though, if you perhaps would like to see a little bit more decalage, in particular, decalage, I don't know if that's a word, oh god, At any rate, yeah, let me know in the comments below if you would like to see perhaps a little bit more stickers or various other things. But chances are, seeing how things are kind of already down on pencil with the drawing here, we won't be able to add that to the drawing, but we'll probably add that to the 3D render of this drawing later on. And perhaps if you're new to the channel, so just in case you are unaware, essentially I am more of a sculptor than a drawer, so to speak. At any rate, I can obviously draw equally as well as I can sculpt for the most part. But what I'd like to do is kind of make a drawing or concept drawing of the clay car that I'm going to do, and then basically make a 3D version of it, and then make a, well, claymation out of it, and generally take those hundreds of hours and smash it into a wall. And if you would perhaps like to see more of my content involving perhaps stop motion or various other clay cars in question or characters, be sure to check the links in the post description below. There you will find a few of my cartoon shorts, as well as some of the links to the Polara series, which is the little green car in the background there, which is the most recent clay car to the family, as well as a little AE86 in the background there, a little 73 Torino, a 27 T-Bucket, and a 32 Model A Coupe. And well, personally, the little Deuce Coupe there, the 32, is probably one of my favorites, mainly because it's been around so long and was, well, the first car in this little clay car collection. At any rate, the reason I'm doing a little R32 at the moment was by popular demand on my TikTok social media. And the next one I'll be drawing is a GT500, which is kind of a, well, unfortunately the person wanted to do a certain name that I will not mention, which is highly associated to a lot of copyright, so we're going to have to work around some design issues with that car in particular. But I'm willing to accept the challenge as long as we just don't use a certain name in question. Everything should be okay. At any rate, how this involves you, the dear viewers, is essentially you're going to be kind of in charge to, well, which car is going to be doing better and which car will ultimately become a 3D model first. So if the Skyline drawing obviously does a lot better than the GT500 model, well, then we're going to build the, well, R32 first, and well, if the R32 does, well, worse than the GT500, well, then the GT500 will be the next car model in question. So now that we've gotten all that aside, we are now on the final stretch of the R32, and basically we're just going to redo all of the lines, making sure that we do not lose any of those fine details now that all the blending and stuff like that is now finished. And essentially all the blending was me running over the gray or silver with a white, basically Prismacolor, to kind of help add some of those, well, highlight spots that the sun's hitting the car and reflecting a little bit more light off the paint than the other various areas. And now we're just going to do a little bit of cleanup essentially, then we can roll in these beauty shots. It seems to go by very quick on the video version in comparison to, well, real life. I think this drawing took about 13, 14 hours, so I mean it was a fairly quick one in comparison to some other drawings I've done in the past. Not the most detailed, but still, this stuff takes a long time, so be sure to smack that like button if you enjoyed the content. Comment below what you think of the drawing, and share with your friends, and perhaps consider subscribing if you're new. At any rate, here's your beauty shots of the R32 Skyline, so let me know what you think and, well, cast your vote. So, if you like the GT500 more, be sure to keep your post notifications turned on so you do not miss that drawing video, and, well, be sure to do the same process there to make sure you get your chance to see which car you want to see made first in a 3D render. Hello my dear viewers, so to start this process, or this R32 Skyline, we're going to grab some oven baked clay and basically start making the actual foundation, or the frame for the, well, entire plasticine car itself essentially. So what we'll start out with is basically by making a, well, brick that is roughly the same size as the actual clay cars you see in the background. And well, if you're already a subscriber, you've probably seen the process of them being made. And if you're new here, well, check out the links in the post description below so that way you can see how that hot rod was made, the Polara, and the AE86. And if you're a regular follower or viewer of this channel in particular, You're probably aware that there was a few different drawings essentially happening as well, which was kind of a comparison to see which video would do better. Well, it was a GT500 versus a Skyline, and well, the Skyline did much better on the algorithm aspect. So we're going to start off by building the Skyline. We'll eventually get to the GT500, but we're going to start with this one first. Which also means I should probably get started on that restoration video of the AE86. As we progress in the build, you will later see the AEs pulled forward for more of a size comparison, because the Skyline's probably going to be a little closer to, well, the AE in size in comparison to the other cars in the background there. Plus, well, it's going to be kind of a drift partner, and well, if you've seen the cartoon with the drag race involved, you're probably aware that the AE86 unfortunately did not cross the finish line exactly in one piece. So I'm going to have to animate a stop-motion cartoon of my little clay characters essentially restoring the car, so that way it can basically, well, join the Skyline and perhaps a drift duo. And if by chance you haven't seen the cartoons, well, literally car-tunes, the links are available in the post description, and well, if you have, be sure to just go binge watch it anyway, because well, the one drag race took me 183 hours to complete a, well, 2-minute video, unfortunately. It's a lot of work doing this stuff. It is a lot of fun, however, seeing my, well, clay cars come to life and have their own characters, and then basically spend approximately the same amount of hours it takes to make one, and, well, then just smash it in the end. It's a little painful seeing it smashing, but oh well, it's kind of cool. It's all worth it. If I were to make a personal suggestion, if you're making clay cars and smashing them into walls during races, perhaps keep the sparks to a minimum, because I remember that part being probably the most painful out of the entire process. Having to move each individual spark through frame by frame was rather tedious, to say the very least. At any rate, apart from my slow descent into madness due to stop-motion animation, be sure to like the video if you enjoy the content, comment below what you think, perhaps let me know which one of my clay cars is your favorite, perhaps consider sharing with your friends, and subscribing if you're new. At any rate, hope this video inspires you to perhaps do a little bit of creating on your own. Anyway, that's enough from me for now. I will see you towards the end and give you a quick briefing on what we'll be working on next time on the Skyline build. So to start this portion of the build process, what we're going to start off with is building ourselves a little sanding stick and or also known as a sanding block, I suppose. But in this case, it's more of a stick shape. So what we're going to start out with is 80 grit sandpaper and then basically just fold it around the actual stick and then tape it accordingly so it doesn't essentially move around. You don't necessarily need to tape it in place, however, it does make, well, your life a little easier during the sanding process itself, which, in all honesty, is probably one of my least favorite things about having to sculpt and, well, carve these models is sanding, but it's a necessary evil a lot of the time, and it makes things look a lot better in the end, so it's definitely worth the time investment, unfortunately. Luckily for you, the dear viewers, it's, well, merely a few minutes of, well, some sped up footage essentially, just letting you know that basically I'm sanding the entire car down. So, what takes a few minutes out of your time, well, took me probably 2 or 3 hours, if not more. There was a fair amount of off-camera work with this process just to keep, well, the video time down and redundancy down as well. Apart from my absolute passion and love for sanding, other good thing about this process is, well, you can kind of fix your mistakes, and to a certain degree during the actual sculpting process with the sculpty clay, there are certain moments where I'm basically kind of actually just going, that doesn't need to be perfect, I'm going to sand it down anyway. So you can take advantage of that during the sculpting process. And, well, it really doesn't make any much more difference on your end for the sanding thing, apart from perhaps having to pay attention a little bit more to your even and high spots. But when you're working with cars or even real auto body, it's generally just kind of a step that you're always going to have to deal with. Now that the heavy majority of the sanding is done, what we're going to do is basically go over the actual car body itself and just kind of find all the low spots and add very thin layers of clay and just kind of mold it in so it's nice and even again. Perhaps a little high on those low spots for before, because we are going to go over it one more time with some 120 grit sandpaper just to make sure everything is nice and even. Now, also remember that a lot of this, well, sculpty clay, if not all of it, is basically going to be covered with plasticine, so the actual body itself part doesn't exactly need to be perfect. However, the more time you spend on it, well, the easier the actual plasticine process becomes in the end. But the top layer is always going to be kind of exposed, which will essentially be your windows in the future, which will always be exposed oven baked clay. So if I have any recommendations for those building their own little clay cars, that will be the one area you're probably going to want to pay a little bit more attention to with your high and low spots, as well as the sanding, making sure that they're nice and smooth, because, well, they have to have the appearance of glass later on. And one other thing you can also do during the actual shell manufacturing is kind of get your basic body lines and or shape down nice and smooth, so that way it just takes a little bit more pressure off later on for you, and it makes life easier for future you, which I have a tendency not to always do, unfortunately, but in this case, we're going to be nice to future me. Now, going over the footage, doing the voiceover separately from the actual recording, obviously, I've come to notice that some of the low spots aren't necessarily very visible due to probably the overexposure, because I have a lot of lights in my art studio just to make sure you can see basically all the small little details. But some word for advice during this part when you're kind of doing auto body work or looking for high and low spots. Generally, majority of what you're actually going to be doing is with your hands. You're going to be feeling out those spots as opposed to actually visually seeing them, because, well, your eyes can be a little deceptive, unfortunately, when it comes to things like that, whereas feeling those spots definitely does not. Now we're moving on to the next step, which is essentially just marking out our guidelines for the future carving that we're going to be doing, and to kind of help with making sure that our fenders basically stay all even and, well, basically identical. Probably not exactly perfect, but close enough. Now for this part, we're going to want to use a nice scalpel that's nice and sharp, preferably, because that makes your life a lot easier. Now, anyone trying to do this, you're going to want to be a little careful. Try not to cut yourself, obviously, because, well, that's just not a lot of fun. At that point, you're going to get a lot of blood on your sculpture, which might not exactly be necessary. To be quite honest, I can't exactly remember the last time I've cut myself doing this stuff. Have a lot of years of experience playing with these tiny little clay knives, so I've been fairly fortunate and can't exactly recall the last time apart from being very young, so just be safe, and a general rule of thumb is try to always cut away from yourself as opposed to cutting towards yourself, but sometimes with small models that isn't always the case, and if that is, just be sure to take your time a little bit for longer than usual, and well, don't force it into your hand or finger, obviously. Now, thinking this over, one person could actually use a set of carving tools, which I actually do have at my disposal, I'll admit. However, sometimes it's just a little bit quicker to use the scalpel. Due to the nice, really sharp edge, it just basically lops it off in comparison to having to chip it off slowly. Because, well, in spite of popular belief of me being a stop-motion animator that I'm incredibly patient, I'll be honest, I'm not always that patient. When it comes to my art form, yes, I can be to a degree. However, certain manufacturing steps as well as people, not always that patient. I twitch. Anyway, now that all the carving and sanding is done for the most part, we're going to add, well, some layers onto the car sculpture itself, just to make sure things are even, and add a rear bumper just to make our life a little bit easier, and use less plasticine in the non-too-distant future, because sculpty oven-baked clay is actually lighter than plasticine, mainly because, well, once you bake it, you're essentially taking all the moisture out of that clay, and it actually does become a lot lighter, as opposed to, well, the plasticine, which kind of permanently just stays, well, malleable in comparison to the oven stuff, obviously, which once it's baked stays hardened forever up until the point you basically drop it and it shatters into 1,000 pieces. If that ever happens, like for example my Wendigo, yeah, it's happened a lot unfortunately, where I've had to repair that skull, which is kind of why things have taken a lot longer than expected for my latest animation to come out. However, I promise that it will be out very soon. I will at least have a sneak preview, probably upcoming this following week, I'm hoping. So be sure you have your post notifications turned on. If you don't, perhaps consider subscribing if you're new, like this video, and share with your friends, and perhaps get some other subscribers involved so they don't miss the upcoming SCP fight, because, well, that's taken a lot of work, and I'm so far at, well, 2,500 frames. 2,502 to be precise, actually. I'm assuming I probably only have maybe another 1,000 to go, hopefully. We'll see. I'm probably going to have to do a slight warning ahead of time on that video because, well, the Wendigo does do a fair number on SCP-049's minions, for example. There's not a whole lot of left to them once he's done through. And if you perhaps really enjoy the car series, be sure to check out the links in the post description below so you can see, well, more of the Skyline build, my other car builds, and perhaps some animations too if you are new here as well. Be sure to go check out those so you can definitely, well, if you haven't sold yet on subscribing, those hopefully will, because yeah, it takes a lot of time and effort to do this sort of thing. It's not exactly easy, but it's something that is a lot of fun because the only limit is your imagination, and it's really cool, well, creating basically something out of completely nothing and then be able to tell stories with those objects. So during part 3 of the Skyline R32 project, we're going to start by making out some rear wheels. We'll eventually get to the front ones, but first we're going to mold our sculpty clay basically around these little gears, which will be our future wheel hub assembly, and essentially just shape a nice round object to fit over top of that, which we will glue on in a later episode. Now, it takes quite a bit for the rear wheels in particular, basically because you want to make sure that you have a big, nice hollowed out space while keeping everything nice and round, which is not exactly the easiest task to do, especially upon removal. You're going to want to be very, very gentle, basically like a surgeon, as it were. Now, later on, we'll be taking care of the front wheels as well, which I'm sure you will notice will be quite a lot thinner in, well, comparison to the rear tires. Mainly because that gives you a little bit more added clearance for later on. With all the steering components, things tend to get a little bit tight on these, well, very small scale clay cars. And it's not exactly easy, so if you can give yourself a millimeter or two of breathing room, I would suggest you take it. And we'll also be going over some of the front end framework, which will basically be the engine front support, as well as the front cross member, which will be, well, used for mounting all of our steering components as well. So it's a fairly vital part to, well, the clay car project build and, well, any real life car from a technical standpoint. There isn't too much of a difference between these two, considering all the mechanical parts work, apart from, well, the engine obviously doesn't run. Maybe one day I can make a full-scale engine that actually does kind of work from clay, but that sounds like a lot of work, and it doesn't exactly fit the whole stop-motion niche, unfortunately. But let me know in the comments below if you would perhaps like to see that someday, and perhaps I'll gear towards making a cutaway engine, essentially, out of clay, which would be kind of cool. And by chance, if you're new here and haven't caught up on, well, the Skyline build process so far, be sure to check out the post description below. There you will find, well, links to all of my other Skyline build videos, a couple of my animations with my cars as well, and some links to my social media profiles, be it Facebook, TikTok, or Instagram. Anyway, that's enough from me from now. I will talk to you towards the end of the video to give you a quick recap on what we basically all worked on and what to expect next time on the build process. Now, I do realize I'm also a little behind on animation schedules. Unfortunately, those SCPs are kicking my butt just as much as they're kicking their own butts at the moment, so continuing to work hard on that, and not sure when I will have that exactly posted, but I'm hoping it won't be too much longer. I'm going to get back at it after this video is done posting. Therefore, my cell phone is, well, free and available again for taking thousands upon thousands of pictures. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to be kind and leave a little thumbs up there to let me know you appreciate all my hard work. Perhaps comment below what you think of the clay car project, or consider subscribing if you're new. That would be awesome. At any rate, I will talk to you towards the end of the video so you know what to expect for next time on the R32 build. So personally, the way I like to start most of my clay engines is basically by making the crankcase, which is basically just a large cylindrical sphere, and then you can add on your various, well, other big block parts, then, well, slowly shape it together and add small details as you go along. Now, it's also important to keep things to a certain size limit, so that way you don't have any future problems with making things fit under the hood and inside the engine bay. Not only that, it gives you a good approximation on what to base all your parts off of. That way it saves you a lot of time and energy on having to measure things later on, such as, well, where the pistons would be going if there were any, which is basically the part we're adding onto the little crankcase now. And these will be your two main parts of the actual engine. So once you shape those together, you can basically start adding on smaller details and components later on to make it, well, look more like an RB26 as opposed to a big block of clay, which will be shown later on during the video process once the engine block is essentially gone through 1 or 2 stages of oven baking. That way you can actually add on those small details without worrying about smushing your previous small details. We'll also be working on the engine bay a bit, adding some shock tower mounts as well as some other mechanical components just to make sure everything's going to fit nice and well when we go to, well, attach everything to the actual car once there's a little bit more bodywork done to it. And personally, this can be a bit of a tedious process for any of those who are perhaps trying to make their own little clay cars out there. Making full-scale, detailed engines isn't exactly the easiest thing. However, personally, I find it one of the most satisfying parts because, well, I'm a bit of a car nerd and I love, well, engines and various other mechanical components, so it's quite a lot of fun doing the research for these cars and learning how it kind of all fits together, even if it's only on a small scale, building it out of clay. I still think it's pretty cool because, well, there's not too many people in the world that are doing this sort of thing. As far as my knowledge is, there's only a few, which is, well, I'm one of 2. Not exactly the largest of niches, however, I think it's personally pretty cool, and hopefully it has influenced a couple people out there to make their own little clay projects. I know there's a Spino and various other things, so it's definitely paid off in that reward, so hopefully I can inspire a few other young people, as well as perhaps older people, to get into this sort of hobby, because, well, it's a lot of fun, and it's a lot of satisfaction seeing your creations come to life, especially during the animation process. And by chance, if you're new here, be sure to go check out the links in the post description. That way you can check up on the rest of the Skyline build, as well as find a few of my other car animations, as well as other cartoons. And by chance, if you enjoy the content and you're new here, be sure to hit that subscribe button, perhaps a few thumbs up as well, to let me know you appreciate my hard work. Leave a comment below what you think of the projects, as well as be sure to have your post notifications turned on so you don't miss any of the new videos that I upload. Or even perhaps share a couple of the videos so that way you can help grow the community here. Now, in the past, I used to have a little timestamp challenge for people to keep an eye open for Milton the Moose, which I unfortunately have been kind of neglecting lately. However, with this video, I decided to actually remember it this time. So be sure to keep your eyes peeled for Milton the Moose, and if you're the first to spot him and timestamp correctly when he shows up during the video, you will have your comment pinned at the top of the comment section. And, well, for those of you who are perhaps new here, Milton the Moose is essentially the little mascot in, well, the profile picture. So he's pretty easy to spot. He kind of is a goofy looking character in comparison to the other little clay guys that will be showing up later on, as well as the cars in the background. At any rate, that's enough for me at the moment. I will talk to you towards the end of the video. Sit back, relax, enjoy the content, and perhaps grab some clay and build along with me. So to start this video off, we're just going to start by making a couple little cooling system parts that we're going to need for later on during the construction. Unfortunately, doing the voiceover later on in the editing, I know that, well, they don't actually get mounted. However, it is all painted the same color, so it just kind of makes sense to, well, have all your mechanical parts that you're going to be painting done, and that way it's just done a little bit faster and smoother, because, well, this is already kind of tedious as is, which, well, this episode took me a little longer to composite out than normal, mainly because, well, it is very tedious, tiny little engine work that we're dealing with here. And for just a good size reference, basically that little RB26 that we're painting / making parts for here is no bigger than the tip of my thumb. As you can clearly see in this clip, it's really not much bigger or smaller. Anyway, we're going to glue on this little pulley here, and then we're going to move on to the next process, which is painting this little RB26 to make it all shined up and look, well, a little more legit instead of just like a little brick of clay. So the first color we're going to start with is silver, because, well, there's sure a lot of it on this little engine here, basically being a mostly cast aluminum block, as well as having a lot of aluminum parts all over it. Kind of makes sense to start with the color that you're probably going to be working with the most. Now, I did do 2 to 3 layers on each mechanical component to actually make it look a little bit more pure color at that point, because it being white painting onto this, I almost should have maybe used a primer of some kind to kind of help make it stick through a little bit more. However, doing it in a few different layers works just the same. It just takes a little bit more time, but luckily for you, it's not all shown on, well, video, so things go by a little bit quicker for you, and unfortunately for me, it just takes hours, so it's just something I gotta live with, unfortunately. However, the end result is pretty cool, I must say so myself. And let me know what you think in the comments below. Chances are I go a little further into detail than I really need to, because most of it generally does get covered up with, well, the rest of the car with a hood and fenders and wheels and all of that stuff. However, working on cars for several years at this point with my own projects, every part generally serves a purpose, so I kind of am well aware of what should be under there, and if I missed a part, it would just personally bug me a little bit. So I generally like to go a little bit overboard with the details, and it kind of helps with, you know, giving the car some added character, and it really looks cool. And not to mention later on, well, in this YouTube channel's future, we're going to do a mini car series where essentially these little clay cars are going to be built and smashed and, well, modified during a stop-motion series, so there's kind of a reason to all of the madness with all the detail and monotony with the mechanical components in particular, because these cars will be pulling in and out of shops, essentially being modified and changed in a stop-motion process while I'm also making them in the background. It's going to be quite a handful, but however, I think the end result will look pretty cool, not to mention, well, there's no one exactly out there doing anything quite like that, so my personal, you know, preference would be that it's kind of cool on its own and not exactly going off anyone else's inspiration other than my own. Other than perhaps some suggestions that I get from my followers and subscribers, like Mr. Tiger HD, who happens to have a very sharp set of eyes and was able to spot Milton the Moose in the last how-to Skyline video, so be sure to keep your eyes peeled for him. As always, you'll get a shout out, and, well, be sure to timestamp correctly when he shows up during the video process, and, well, that's how you essentially enter that. At any rate, he suggested that the Skyline be red, which is why we're doing the valve cover red. Well, not only that, I saw a lot of reference photos for the RB26, and just about every single one had a red valve cover. So it's going to match quite nicely with a red car, so we're going to go with a red Skyline instead of a silver and blue one like the concept drawing. At any rate, I hope you enjoyed this video. Be sure to keep your eyes peeled for Milton the Moose, and, well, if you're already this far, perhaps you have missed him already. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. At any rate, if you enjoyed the content, be sure to leave a thumbs up. That way I know all my hard work is appreciated. Perhaps leave a comment in the comment section below other than looking for the moose. And, well, yeah, I'll see you towards the end. I'll give you a bit brief on how everything basically went together, a little bit more in depth, as well as what we'll be doing next time to this little Skyline R32 project. At any rate, that's enough for me for now. I hope you enjoyed the video. Sit back, relax, enjoy the content, or perhaps grab some clay and sculpt along with me. Well, actually, we're not doing so much sculpting. Maybe grab a paintbrush instead? Hello again, my dear viewers. So here just to do a quick brief statement or quote from Bob Ross about a little happy mistake that might otherwise go overlooked if I don't mention it. Any rate, I unfortunately didn't add that little cone thing till later on with the build process of the turbo, obviously. However, I obviously had to rebake the turbo, and in that process it kind of, well, burnt the clear coat a little bit. But in a sense, that's actually kind of a good thing because I essentially touch up the actual paint on the intake turbo part, but not the exhaust turbo part. For any of those people out there that are familiar with how turbos work, well, obviously there's an exhaust port and an intake port, and the, well, exhaust port generally gets a little bit hot, so I figured perhaps leaving that part slightly discolored would probably look a little bit more legit, like it's actually being used. So there's just a little happy mistake that if you just so happen to see some weird discoloration on the back half of the turbos later on, well, now you know why. So we'll first start off by cleaning up this engine bay, getting it all prepped for paint, just making it look a little bit more presentable, straightening up the lines and low spots, because, well, once that engine is in, we won't have the opportunity to really do anything quite like this again, so may as well make it nice and perfect, because, well, I'm a bit picky, and yeah, I don't want to do things twice and have to paint it several times over, so we're just going to start by, well, hacking things here. Unfortunately, this part I hack a little too much. At any rate, we'll fix that. It'll be easier to work on while it's out of the engine bay as is. We'll make sure that little RB26 fits inside there a little tighter than normal because it's sitting a little high, and I can see that being an issue for when we finally decide to start manufacturing a little hood for this car. Even though in 9 times out of 10 my cars don't usually have the hoods on it because, well, I don't want to hide all that detail, obviously. However, for aesthetic purposes, I generally like to make one anyway, just in case there's that one rare situation where I want to have the hood on, or just have it kind of propped up in the background to make it look a little bit cooler and fancier. Because unfortunately, making the hood is probably one of the hardest parts about making these little cars out of clay, because you're dealing with very, very thin layers and there's not a whole lot of clearance room, unfortunately. So It's not exactly an easy task, so the more prep work I do now means the less, well, strenuous the hood's going to be. At any rate, now we're going to do a bit of test fitting, making sure there's enough clearance for all the pipes and all things like that, and then we're going to basically take the engine back out, carve those sections, test fit it back in. It's kind of, unfortunately, a bit of a tedious process. However, it is necessary to make sure everything's going to fit properly. Because, unfortunately, dealing with stuff that's this small, there's not exactly a really good way to get a good precise measurement on this stuff, so a lot of the time you're just kind of having to eyeball it to make sure things fit properly, and the best way to do that is just kind of pulling it in and out of the engine bay. What we're also going to do, because I'm kind of a fan of really dirty, loud exhausts, we're going to add a side pipe to this car, just straight out the side, right behind the front wheel, because why not? It's going to be extremely loud, and we're going to have it spit some fire, because, well, that would just look cool. It'll be extra work in the stop motion process, but I'm willing to make that sacrifice. As well as the name of Clay Horsepower, because, well, that's now going to be a thing, because why not? Clay Horsepower is what makes the clay wheels move, right? Yes, it is. Anyway, speaking of making clay horsepower, we're now going to essentially clean up this pipe and give it a quick oven bake, just to make sure things are nice and even, because it's going to be really tight once it's in there. It's in there, there's not going to be a whole lot of, well, room to work on things anymore, so we want to make sure all these tiny little components are basically nice and perfect, so there's just no issues later on when it's finally installed in the engine bay, because you won't be able to really get at it very easily without having to yank things out, and I don't want to have to do that a whole bunch of times. Then we're going to move on to installing all those little parts, and once those are in place, we'll start painting that engine bay as well as the undercarriage. Now, I generally just like to go black most of the time with all of this stuff, because that's what I kind of like to do to my cars in real life, is generally just rock guard the entire, well, shell, undercarriage, engine bay, everything to keep it nice and rust proof. Not only that, it does look nice and clean in the end, and will make that engine pop a lot more. That way it kind of shines out a little bit more in comparison to some of the rough edges that are in there. It kind of hides the imperfections as well, because black is a good color for that. The reason I also like to do that for the undercarriage, for the stop motion cars in particular, is because, well, that hides basically all the shadowing and various other little things that I like to hide under the cars during the animation process, because, well, they tend to defy gravity just a little bit and twist around, so I put little black bricks under there, and, well, if everything's blacked out, you're just less likely to actually notice that on camera, so there's a few reasons that I like to do it this way. And it kind of gives you that advantage to have that slight slide of camera, as it were. Then once all the paint work is done, we'll move on to getting some of those pipes installed, as well as making a few other small parts. Now, unfortunately, there's some bad news towards the end of this video. I will have to remake some things because it's just a little too large, and, well, instead of adjusting the plumbing to make it work for those parts, it's probably just best to make the parts work for the plumbing due to the, well, limited space issue. So that will be covered in the build rundown towards the end of the video. And if by chance you do appreciate the content and like all the hard work that I put into these armature car dolls, as it were, be sure to smash that like button, leave a comment below what you think of the project, perhaps a suggestion what we could do to it, and be sure to keep your eyes peeled for Milton the Moose. And if you're unfamiliar with who that is, he is essentially the little mascot for the channel. He is the, like, profile picture, as it were, so be sure to keep your eyes peeled for him, and if you timestamp correctly when he shows up, you will get a shout out like Mr. Tiger HD, who happens to have a very, very sharp set of eyes and is usually the, well, guy to look out for when it comes to spotting Milton. So congratulations, Tiger, and keep up the good work, my friend. I guess you could say he has the eye of a tiger. Ha ha, pun intended. Oh, I'm sorry, that's a little cringeworthy. Anyway, apart from my terrible jokes, perhaps consider subscribing if you're new, if you appreciate the talent that goes into making these tiny little clay cars. It's not easy making these tiny little parts, but in the end, I think it looks really cool and kind of is awesome seeing the little thing idle around in the stop motion process and punish the clay tires, as it were. Anyway, that's enough for me at the moment. I will see you towards the end of the video with the build rundown. So if you are a regular watcher of the Skyline project, well, you're probably aware that last time we left off with the cooling system, well, was a little too big, so we're going to start off by making a couple replacement parts real quick here, because, yeah, we don't want you to watch things over and over again. Unfortunately, this is kind of my bad. I probably should have built the cooling system last, made all the plumbing work and various other parts before doing that, but oh well, sometimes I get ahead of myself. And, well, at least at that point, we have a couple extra spare parts in my inventory. Well, because you never know when you're going to need a spare radiator or intercooler, right? Especially when it's made out of clay. Although it'll probably end up in my future junkyard prop set, so... oh well, at least it doesn't go completely to waste. And once we're done making the replacement cooling parts, then we'll move on to doing a little strut tower bar for, well, the better handling for the Skyline for future steering components, because it totally makes a big difference with this. It just kind of actually looks cool personally. It's generally why I like to do it, and I have them on just about all of my own personal cars as well, at least the fun ones. Anyway, then once we're done that, we'll move on to making a front clip, which is proved to be quite a difficult part, and I will probably do some more voiceover once we get there, because that is proving to be quite a challenge, and unfortunately we might end up cutting some things back just because I think the front clip looks a little too far, but we'll worry about that once we get there. And now we're at the stage of doing some test fitting and making sure that our tiny little replacement parts, well, fit much better than the other ones, and we have a lot more clearance for, well, the future project that's going to be a massive pain in the butt here right away. Yay. Now we're moving on to making the little strut tower bar, which is fairly simple actually. All you really have to do is grab a spare piece of, well, armature wire, which is generally what I use for pretty much all my other armature dolls actually, and then just bend that accordingly to make sure you have enough clearance over that valve cover and connects to the two, well, shock tower points. Then all you have to do is make a couple mounting plates for it to stick onto, which I generally just make out of oven-baked clay and press the wire into just to kind of make marks, and then well, we glue it all together, and yeah, there's your strut tower bar. Now we're going to move on to a little bit of painting here, where it's kind of hesitant on honestly painting the windows this early in this process, but it was probably worth it considering we're going to be doing, well, another baking layer for that front bumper, and I noticed a few other body lines that I personally didn't really like or kind of missed, and it just kind of helped having the windows painted in and properly in place to give me more of a body line feature and where things should be, as opposed to it just being all white. It's a little hard to make out at that point in my opinion. So it was worth it. We will probably end up touching this paint up several times over due to the fact that it's going to be baked, but at least this point we have one layer down, and it kind of gives me a good reference on where I need to work on next. So seeing how we have the black paint out, we may as well paint these tires that have been, well, made very early on in the build process for this project in particular. And if by chance you're just tuning into this series, well, be sure to check out the links in the post description below. There you'll find a few of my cartoons, as well as the rest of the, well, series to the Skyline project. Maybe one day there will be many other people making these little clay cars, and there'll be much more, well, literally rolling sculptures around. It's not exactly easy pulling it off, but it's pretty cool in the end, especially seeing it come to life through the stop-motion animation process, so be sure to check out those links in the post description. Not only that, it really helps out small content creators like me if you spend more time watching my content, cause, well, the algorithm isn't exactly very friendly, so as long as you, the dear viewer, it basically sticks out through the end of the entire video, it definitely helps out a lot. Not only does it add to my watch time minutes, but it also values the content much more, and it's more likely to reach more people at that point. So if by chance you enjoy my content and want to help out even more, be sure to just leave a like on this video, comment below what you think of the Skyline project, share with your friends, and perhaps consider subscribing if you're new, because your support is highly appreciated, and, well, I wouldn't be doing all this hard work if it wasn't for, well, some of those, bigger fans of mine. So thank you very much, and I will continue to work hard, and hopefully we will be able to break in that Polara sitting in the background soon, because personally, I don't like it just kind of hanging out back there and not, well, having any tire punishment or bumper damage like the AE86, so I will probably be working on a new stop-motion project very soon. Now we're at the part that I was talking about earlier, that front bumper slash clip that's going to be kind of, well, not exactly easy to work with. The clearance levels are, well, next to none, which has been kind of an issue with this entire project so far. So it's going to be probably kind of interesting, because the further I'm getting along with this bumper, the more I'm starting to realize that if I ever want to take this engine out in the future, that with all this turbo plumbing in particular, it's basically not going to happen. So I'm going to have to figure out a way to make this bumper either removable or make parts of the engine more removable so I can yank it out for future, well, stop motion projects, because eventually I would like all these little clay guys to, well, be building and working on these cars in stop motion, as well me in the background also makes parts for them, but we kind of need a foundation to start with, so that's where we kind of are, well, building all these clay cars at the moment. So we're going to start off with this video with, well, ripping that entire front end apart so we can cut everything back essentially, well, 3 to 4 millimeters, just because I don't exactly like the clearance levels that I'm having with that intercooler, because it's rubbing right up against the bumper, and, well, if I want the engine to move around and idle during the animation process, that clearance level has to, well, be pretty much perfect and spot on, so we're gonna have to move everything back, unfortunately, but that shouldn't take too long. I've already got an action and plan here, so we can move on to the next part, which is, well, making more bodywork panels, essentially doing the hood as well as some of the back fender work and a few other little things to the front bumper in particular, and it actually starts looking like a Skyline by the time, well, we're through. It's obviously still in the shell form, it's got a lot to go yet, but it's starting to at least look like a car by the end of this video. But before we get there, we're first going to shave back the rad support, as well as the piping for the turbos, and a little bit of modification to the actual intercooler itself, as well as those front fenders as well, just placing everything back a little bit, just so there's actually space for the engine to idle, because with everything basically being attached through those pipes, that front intercooler shakes around, so we need to make sure that there's enough room for that to actually happen without, breaking parts during the stop motion process, because once that starts happening, it's really just kind of a bad day on set day at that point. It's just no fun fixing it. Not to mention, this is also the first time I've actually made a twin-turboed car, so this is proving to take a little bit more effort than I expected it to do. Unfortunately, piping is just not a whole lot of fun to deal with, as I'm sure with people that actually have turbo cars can well understand. But yeah, I was not expecting it to be as stubborn as, well, with the clay, but unfortunately it kind of is. But luckily we are now just on the last step of this process, which is getting everything to fit correctly. So no more massaging after this, thank God. Oh my God. At any rate, we are now going to move on to, well, making sure everything is nice and clear, and then once that is all done and checked out, we will move on to the next step. And I do apologize for being a little behind on my YouTube schedule. I generally post things on weekends, but this car has been kind of a pain in the, well, butt. Speaking of rear ends, we're now going to start working on those rear fenders at this point, because we are now finally finished with making sure that the turbo clearance is all good. No more headache in that regards, at least. So now we can move on to other headaches, which essentially involves making the basic outline of the entire car, because this is just technically the frame still of the actual, well, clay car, which is also technically clay, but this is just oven clay. What I usually like to do to keep the weight down, instead of having a full plasticine car like the orange hot rod like my earlier models, is kind of do, well, mostly oven clay shell and then a small layer of plasticine, so that way I can affect things during the animation process, like smashing things into walls like the AE86 did during the last drag race. And if by chance you're just tuning into this series as well as this channel, be sure to check out the links in the post description below once you're done this video, so that way you can catch up on, well, not only the Skyline build, but see a couple other cool Claymations or stop-motion projects that I've also worked on in the past. And currently I'm working on a new animation with one of my cars, which I'm sure you've kind of noticed that it's not exactly here. Generally all my clay cars are in the background, but the Polara is, well, kind of MIA, mainly because it's on set downstairs being prepped for, well, its break-in period. I've managed to do a couple little burnouts with it so far, and we're doing a short animation with that, so be sure you have your post notifications turned on so you don't miss, well, the Polara's little debut coming up. As well as be sure to keep your eyes peeled in the background for Milton the Moose, and if you're the first to spot him and timestamp correctly when he shows up, you will get a shout out in the next coming how-to video. And speaking of shoutouts, shout out to Mr. Epic Tiger HD, who is, well, the last guy to spot Milton the Moose in the how-to video of the Skyline series. He seems to have a pretty sharp pair of eyes when it comes to finding that moose, so beware of him, my, well, fellow competitor dear viewers. Be sure to keep your eyes sharpened and ready, because, well, Tiger HD has eyes of a tiger, apparently. So now we're going to be working on the front bumper, obviously, a little bit. This is the part where, well, things start looking a lot more like a Skyline at this point. Basically, what we're going to do is add some actual front end support, add some wires in the pillar parts, because, well, they're a little flimsy at the moment, and unfortunately kind of end up falling off a couple times off camera. So I kind of got sick of that happening, so I decided to add some support in those, because later on, good chance that this bumper is going to be, well, constructed in a odd manner that I'm personally not exactly very excited to try and do. I mean, it's kind of cool, but it's going to be a massive pain in the butt. I'm essentially going to have to make this bumper removable. Therefore, during the animation process with this car, if I ever want to pull the engine out with those small characters in the background, the entire front clip is going to have to be removable. So essentially, we're giving this front bumper some additional support because, well, it's going to be constantly removed and reinstalled on this car, chances are, in the future. Then, once we're done this, we're going to move on to making a little aftermarket hood for this Skyline, which, to be fully honest, chances are the hood is never going to be used all that often during the animation process with the car. Kind of like the same way with it is the AE86, I just don't feel comfortable hiding all that engine detail in particular. So, yeah, it's there just in case I ever really want to use it, but chances are it's probably never going to be really on the car. But it's there just in case I ever feel like it. Anyway, that's enough commentary from me at the moment. I will talk to you towards the end of the video, giving you a quick build rundown. So, if you enjoyed the content, be sure to leave a like, comment below what you think of the project, share with your friends, and perhaps consider subscribing if you're new. So, that's enough from me. I will talk to you towards the end. So up first and foremost, we're going to fix some, well, roof lines here because, well, I took the car's roof to a belt sander to kind of, well, for one, save some time and fix that roof line just a little bit to make it a little sharper because it wasn't quite looking, well, skyline-y enough, if that's a word. It's definitely not a word, but we're going to just say it is for this sake because it didn't quite have the right shape, so I decided to take things back quite a bit with some power tools just to save a little bit of time with, well, hand sanding would have taken several hours. In this case, it only took a couple of minutes, just kind of cleaning up the edges, making them a little more round off, basically, not quite as sharp as before, which, well, is a lot less work than trying to do it all by hand. Which brings us one step closer to, well, just kind of filling in a couple low spots on the body here, as well as the hood. Gonna fix up a couple low spots on that, and a couple of little lines aren't quite, well, perfect, so we're going to touch those up while we're here as well. That way we have multiple things to throw in the oven, and we're not wasting any time with, well, our power by reheating the oven a bunch of times more than we need to. There comes a point, too, where, you know, you also have to just kind of get things baked so you're not constantly trying to reshape things for time-wise. But for the most part, I try to be as efficient as possible, so that way you can just throw a bunch of things in there, and that way you're not sitting around waiting for a bunch of things to, well, cool down or be in the oven, and then you're just kind of sitting there waiting for, well, stuff to come out, and then I can't film for the next few minutes, which kind of sucks, which is part of the reason why this video has perhaps taken a little longer than usual, mainly because there is a little bit more, well, wait time in between layers and baking things, unfortunately. However, it is getting pretty close to being ready for plasticine at this point. I'm going to have to dig out some steering components here very soon, which I will probably have to order a bunch of parts, and I'll probably have to find a cop car to order for future hot pursuits, because that sounds like a lot of fun for, well, stop-motion projects in particular, to be honest. So one thing I wanted to do as well is just kind of beef up the fenders on the car, because this is technically just the frame. I noticed the Skyline's body, the fenders kind of stick out a little bit more than the door. So I just kind of wanted to make sure that the fenders were more of a high spot than the actual door. Then, of course, you want to kind of make sure that your side skirts are a little bit more level as well. And also make sure that hole is clear for your dirty side exhaust for future, well, really loud noises. Now at this point in the project, we're just going to kind of fix up a couple little low spots as well as uneven areas that I kind of noticed I didn't like in particular, like the fenders were a little too open in some areas, as well as fix some, well, damage from the belt sander as well as hand sanding. The pillars are clearly not in good shape anymore. Make sure your hood's going to fit nice and clear as well inside that actual space. And then we're going to move on to, well, making that front clip, which was quite a difficult process as well, because yeah, well, obviously that's going to be done after the touch-up paint. But at any rate, the front clip is more important because we've seen the paint process happen before on this car. But the front clip is not exactly an easy task. I don't recommend this for any beginners in particular. So bear in mind, if you're ever going to do a twin turbo setup to full detail, it kind of sucks to work with. In, well, probably reality as well as, well, small-scale modeling, especially when you're making everything by hand. But the reason the front bumper has to be essentially removable is because I would like the engine to be, well, removable as well for future, you know, garage scenes when the car is being worked on by mini clay characters. So that's the main reason we want the engine to be pulled out. So therefore, in this case, the front bumper has to be removable as well. So how I'm going to essentially accomplish that is by making a couple studs in the actual car body, by drilling a couple holes and then just running some armature wire through it, and then basically poking it into the nice soft oven baked clay for our frame for the front bumper so far, and then just kind of sculpting and evening things out best I can, and then just gently peeling it off and then baking the actual front bumper. And then we're going to basically just kind of reattach it at that point, and it actually worked out quite well, to be quite honest. I'm surprised it worked as well as it did, especially once we put on the plasticine layer. It won't have any issues on coming off at that point, I would imagine. The only thing that kind of sucks is that I'm basically going to probably have to use a scalpel every time to pull the engine out to, well, remove the front bumper, unfortunately. And on a side note, I figured it only made sense to quickly sculpt out the front headlight assembly while the front clay was still soft, because unfortunately the signal light area is gonna have to be carved out because, well, that's already baked. And now we have the final result of the studs. As you can see, it actually fits quite well and stays in place pretty decently, apart from the obvious color, well, difference, because it's quite thin in comparison to the rest of the car. It works quite well, actually, and I was honestly kind of expecting it not to work as well as it did, but I'm quite happy that it did work out as well as it did, because I figured that was going to be much more of a headache than it actually was. So that means, well, we can basically move on to carving out our little signal light area here, which I unfortunately did kind of mess up a little bit, and I do have to do some extra baking on the actual car body now again, but that's, you know, minor in comparison to, well, the front bumper assembly essentially not working and then having to think and re-engineer from scratch. That would have sucked. So at this point, we're just going to do a couple little cleanup jobs on that front bumper, make it a little bit more presentable, get rid of all the extra little excess clay that's just a little too hard to deal with when, well, it's all soft. So now we can kind of clean up the edges essentially, make it look a little bit more clean and nice and smooth, and what an actual bumper probably should look like, at least the frame of it. And then we're just going to make a couple small parts, and then we'll do a quick build rundown for next time. So we're going to first start off by adding a few layers of clay to the window pillars in particular, mainly because that adds a little bit more depth to the actual windows, making it look, well, a little bit more legitimate, because right now it's just all flush, and, well, technically your window pillars do stick out a little bit more than the actual window, obviously. So we're just going to add one more layer of oven-baked clay before this goes into the oven. That way it kind of saves us a little bit more on material for the plasticine layer later on. But the biggest advantage, obviously, is the weight, because, well, unfortunately, I must admit, the hot rod in the background, that one is a solid plasticine car, and can be a little awkward to move around in comparison to the much lighter, well, AE86, as well as the, well, much larger wagon. Believe it or not, the wagon is a little bit lighter than the actual hot rod, even though the hot rod is, well, quite a bit smaller in comparison. It's just mainly because, well, material choices was a little bit smarter on that aspect. Plus, with the oven-baked clay, you can always start off with, adding a bunch of aluminum essentially inside the actual box portion, saving you even more on, well, material as well as weight in particular, because, well, it's tinfoil. Tinfoil practically weighs nothing. So, if you haven't caught up on the build series, I suggest go check out the links in the post description below. There you can catch up on the build series, as well as see some more animations. I'm also currently working on a new one where, well, I'm breaking in the Polaria. Things are taking a little longer than expected, unfortunately. I'm quite busy, so we'll have that one come out soon. Not sure exactly when, but I will be basically animating shortly after the release of this video, essentially. Anyway, back to the Skyline project. At this point in the build, we're going to quickly clean up the lines in particular, because this is kind of an important part. You want to make sure that your clay line is pretty much perfect for the windows, because this is the one part of the actual frame sculpture, essentially, that is actually going to be, well, visible the entire time. I don't actually put any plasticine layers on the window, mainly because, well, once you start handling things during the animation process, it's kind of nice to actually have the windows essentially as a nice solid point to put your hands to move things around. Therefore, you're not actually worried about damaging the plasticine. And some of you might ask, why do I just do it out of plasticine? For one, it's a little easier to work with in comparison to the actual oven-baked clay, personally. This stuff is much softer when you're working with it, just when it's not actually baked, obviously, in comparison to the actual plasticine, which is a little more solid, but obviously you can't exactly ever bake or make that solid at that point, unfortunately. However, you can manipulate it during the actual animation process, which I'm sure some of you are aware. The A86 took some damage in the drag race, which I need to do an animation in fixing that soon, because, well, not too long from now, I imagine the Skyline will be rolling around and it's going to need a drift partner very soon. So we're going to just add one more layer to the actual fenders here, giving it a little bit more definition, because, well, kind of want to make this Skyline more of a Nismo model, essentially. So I noticed that they tend to have a little bit more of a nasty fender flare setup. Not necessarily nasty, but a little bulkier in comparison to the normal ones. So we're just going to add one more line, kind of giving it a little bit more definition, making things easier during the actual plasticine sculpting process. Then we're going to throw it in the oven one more time for about 10 minutes at 275 degrees Fahrenheit or 135 degrees Celsius. Then we're going to move on to the next step, which is obviously painting the frame a nice bright red color, because, well, I've been mostly going off comments for this build in particular. So we're going to basically, well, veer off from the actual drawing, obviously, and go with a nice bright red. And, well, that's going to be obviously not really ever seen at this point, unfortunately. Basically, mainly the reason we're painting the actual frame is more or less a security layer, just in case, well, one of the plasticine layers kind of gets scratched up during the animation process. Therefore, it won't be nearly as noticeable as, well, a bright white base coat, essentially. Then once we're done adding a few layers of paint to this thing, we're essentially going to move on to adding a few layers of clear coat to the actual windows, basically just giving them a little bit more shiny appearance, kind of making it look more reflective, kind of, fooling everyone that, yes, this part is glass. Therefore, the rest of the car doesn't really have the same appearance, kind of making it look, well, more legitimate, obviously. And also, during this video, I didn't forget to add the moose like last time, so be sure to keep your eyes peeled for Milton the Moose. And for those of you who are perhaps just tuning in or new to the channel, Milton the Moose is essentially the little cartoon character you see as more or less the profile picture, for lack of a better term for description. But keep your eyes peeled for that goofy little moose, and if you timestamp correctly when he shows up during the video, you will get a shoutout in the next how-to video. So be sure to keep your eyes peeled for that silly little character. And perhaps if you're new to the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button and have your post notifications turned on so you don't miss any new content. And if you enjoyed the video, be sure to hit that like button too. That way I know you appreciate all my hard work that I put into these tiny little rolling clay sculptures. It's not exactly easy pulling it off, and I'm going to have to source out some steering parts for this car very soon, because, well, that's probably going to be a bit of a delay, and I might be working on, well, my next clay car for the next little bit if I'm fortunately unable to source out steering parts here, but I kind of have a few ideas up my sleeve, so shouldn't see any delays, but if there are, I'll be working on a Mustang next, so if you see a different car on the next how-to video, don't be too surprised. Also, be sure to perhaps leave a comment in the comment section below, leaving a suggestion for the actual car, what you would like to see on the Skyline, because, well, mostly at this point I think we're veering quite away from the drawing, and it's probably not going to look a thing like it, which I'm personally kind of satisfied by. It's going to be kind of cool going, well, basing off these cars more or less off comments and what you, well, my audience would actually like to see more or less on these little clay sculptures. So don't be shy, leave a comment in the comment section below what you would actually like to see on this car. So far I have a wide body suggestion kit with some white wheels essentially that are deep dish, so we got a few extra plans on the drawing board, and I might even just kind of redo the sketch, to be honest, to match what we've kind of got envisioned for this car so far. Or perhaps share the video with your friends, but at this point, I think I'm going to let you all go and give you a quick build rundown towards the end of the video. Anyway, hope you all enjoyed the content, and thank you for watching. So up first and foremost, we're going to turn this, little paper clip into, actual steering components here. First, obviously, straighten out your paper clip so it's, nice as straight as you can get it, then cut it into 2 halves. Then, using a pair of needle nose pliers, you're going to want to twist the paper clip around into little coils, essentially. And for future reference, this part is basically going to be the sleeve for the actual part that makes the wheel, turn as well as spin. Now we're going to make the rod that actually goes inside that sleeve, and for that we're going to just use some, basically steel rod as well, just a little thicker in gauge, and then bend it accordingly. You want 2 essentially 90-degree angles to start with. One will be for the wheel, the other will be for the push rod, which will keep both wheels working in unison. Then you're going to want to drill a hole in your wheels or rims, so obviously at that point your rim can actually fit onto the rod appropriately and spin around in circles. And for this next bit, we're going to kind of just move away from the steering components for a short little bit and, focus on making some actual deep dish wheels because, this little Skyline is pretty much based off comments for the build process. So if you have any suggestions on what you would like to see added on or taken away from the little clay car, let me know in the comments section below. And one thing I've been kind of pondering the last little while, the concept drawing, which if you haven't seen or caught up on the rest of the series, links are available in the post description below on the Skyline build, as well as some of my other little cartoons. But the thing that I've been pondering is, the spoiler in particular, and if you've seen the concept drawing, obviously we've veered quite a different direction at this point, but that is okay. Personally, I think the way we're going actually looks a lot better than my concept drawing. So, basing this build off the comments has been quite a lot of fun personally so far, and I can't wait, to hear from you guys to see what more suggestions we have for future builds, as well as this one. At any rate, the spoiler is kind of the big thing. Don't know whether or not I want to go with a ducktail or the big kind of, 2000 style spoiler, for lack of a better term, that you see on the concept drawing. I don't really personally like those very much. I kind of like the ducktail, although being a rear-wheel drive car, I do kind of see the purpose of having a bigger spoiler. At any rate, that's one thing I've been pondering, so if you have any other suggestions, let me know. And, be sure to keep your eyes peeled for Milton the Moose, and for those of you who are, kind of unaware, he's kind of a little character or mascot for the channel, and if you timestamp correctly when he exactly shows up during the build process, you will get a shout out in the next how-to video. And, he's a little harder to spot in this one than perhaps some of my other videos, so be sure to keep your eyes peeled, dear viewers. With that being said, quick shout out to Mr. Tiger HD, who happens to have a very sharp set of eyes, who is really, well, keen on finding that moose, so watch out for that guy. And one thing I also should probably mention, I do apologize for taking a little longer for this video upload than normal. However, there was, well, quite a lot of brainstorming involved with this particular episode, more than usual, because I wanted to come up with a new steering component, components, I should say, or method to do it. That way it's a little more uniform, and I shouldn't have to brainstorm each time for a different car on how to make the front wheels spin and turn. Because thus far, every single car I've made has had a slightly different design, and it's kind of, a little bit of a pain trying to go through the entire engineering process on what's going to basically be taking place, versus something that will take a little less time overall and work on just about everything. Unfortunately, that means I'm going to have to take one stint bit where it takes a little longer than usual, and, well, this was that stint bit. So that's why I have, well, uploaded this video a little later than normal, plus I wanted a little more time to give more voiceover, essentially, to kind of help guide for, well, people who might be curious into actually making their wheels spin and turn, because, well, that's not exactly an easy feat to do, especially on a rolling sculpture, which is essentially what I'm making. But for those of a lot of my viewers are particularly into Hot Wheels, and I think that this one would be quite interesting for a lot of them in regards to, well, making your wheels actually spin and turn on your mini cars, because this little setup should actually work quite well for your Hot Wheels stuff too. Obviously, you don't have to worry about having a clay engine in the way like I do, which unfortunately kind of becomes an issue later on, which we'll discuss towards the build process, or build rundown at the end of the video, but that's a future me problem, so. And for those of you who do little die-cast Hot Wheels, it's not as much of an issue, obviously. Depending on how much into detail you like to go, if you're like me, who likes to get, well, pretty much every little part under the hood, then yeah, you might have some issues in regards to your engine bay bumping into things, but yeah, that's a future me problem, so screw that guy. At any rate, at this point in the build, we're just about finished making off these deep dish wheels, which was a request, which was not exactly an easy thing to pull off either. However, personally, they look pretty cool. Well, doing the voiceover well a little after the cars got the wheels on it, I know for a fact that they look actually pretty cool. So it was definitely worth the extra time and effort. At any rate, once this is done, we'll be moving back onto the actual steering components for the little Skyline. So now that we're actually back onto the front end components again, basically there isn't actually too much for us to do at this point in order to get it onto the car, so we're going to line up basically a push rod as well as some caps to kind of help keep those wheels actually on. So basically the push rod is just aluminum actual armature wire that's hooked around a couple times to hook onto the back half of your steering component essentially, so that way both wheels work in unison. But first we're going to make some caps for those wheels so they don't fall off while they're turning. So all you actually really need to do for this is, either grab some wire or the fine piece of your actual, the paper clip, like the plastic ones. You can cut the liner off for those if you're using smaller gauge wire than me, and then just slide that onto the actual rod as a little cap and then glue it on accordingly. So that way it, basically acts as a little washer and it doesn't actually fall off at that point. And it looks like a little cap or dust cap essentially for your wheel setup or brake setup assembly, which the dust cap is generally kind of on something a little older, not so much on modern cars, but in this case we're just going to kind of disguise it. Now the big thing that if you're making any sort of wheels turn, you're going to want to make sure you have a substantial amount of room for actual turning. So I had to do a lot of carving unfortunately because the wheel turning assembly was made after the fact, so the car's frame essentially wasn't really built for it. So that's one thing to take in mind if you're doing this on a little Hot Wheels car. You are going to have to cut a lot into that little plastic essentially to groove out enough space for your wheels to turn left and right. And then once that's all done, all we have to really do is add in the push rod that we've, bent up accordingly so it fits up nice and straight, and then add little caps so obviously that doesn't fall off in the future. So the first thing we're going to do to the car here in order to get it off the jack stands is, give it a set of tires, and for that we're going to use some plasticine clay, and, it's obviously going to be black in color because, tires are black, so therefore use black plasticine. Pop your rims off and basically just wrap them up in the clay plasticine, and there you go, you have some tires. Would also like to wish you all a happy Easter, or at least a delayed one. Hope it was good. I was hoping to have this video posted sooner. Unfortunately, there was some delays and, my entire workshop basically got organized, and then, if you're a TikTok follower, you probably saw what my studio looks like, and I'll give you a small example of some of the new toys later on during this video, in which I got to help speed up the process in making these little clay car projects. We'll also be going over the body on this car quite a bit during this episode, fixing a lot of the body lines, as well as carving out those rear fenders to make everything properly spin, as well as carving out the front fenders quite a lot to basically get a good radical steering radius, so that way, it's a drift car and we can get some stupid angles with it because it will look cool in the animation process with this thing's wheels basically turned pretty much 90 degrees will be kind of the idea. At least what I'm hoping for. I'm probably going to have to do some work on the turbos later on, but that is for a future episode. And if by chance you haven't caught up on the rest of the build series, links are available in the post description below, as well as a few of my cartoons. And as always, be sure to keep your eyes peeled for Milton the Moose. He will pop up at some point during the build, and if you timestamp correctly when he shows up, you will get a shout out in the next how-to video. And for those of you who aren't familiar with who Milton is, he's the little mascot. He's essentially a goofy-looking moose character. He's pretty hard to miss. So now that the car is actually sitting on the ground, this will be the point where we're actually getting into, the carving, sanding, and painting, and all that fun stuff. But we will also give the car a nice shot of clear coat at the end, giving it a nice, shine, so it actually starts looking, more like an actual car towards the actual end of this video. Apart from it, still being in several pieces, it still has to be, obviously assembled at this point, but we're getting one step closer, that is for sure. So, not too much longer from now, and we'll be adding plasticine to this little clay car, and, it will be featuring in an animation shortly after that. So, if you appreciate all the hard work that I put into these things, be sure to smash that like button, leave a comment below what you think of the car, or perhaps leave a suggestion for what you would like to see on it, because, well, this one's actually based mostly off the comment section pretty much on, well, most of my social media platforms, which happens to be Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and, well, if you're not a follower on any of those other ones, be sure to check out the links in the post description once again. You will find links to most of my, well, social media handles there, so that way you can stay up to date in between my, well, video posts, essentially, from YouTube. And be sure to subscribe if you're perhaps new to the channel and just happen to be surfing around on YouTube and are a fan of art and or cars. Well, this is definitely the channel for you because, well, I'm basically a big gearhead. I also like, well, doing other things. I have monster animations and dinosaurs and stuff like that, which are also future projects, but the main focus of this channel is obviously, well, the rolling sculptures, which is generally just a term of speech, but here we actually take that quite literally. Any rate, I will let you continue watching the video. I will talk to you towards the end and give you a quick build rundown, and we'll talk about what we'll be working on next time. Any rate, thank you for watching. We'll first start off this video by, well, starting off where we left last time, by, well, finishing up this little ducktail and attaching it to the actual Skyline. Then we're going to move on to, well, the actual steering problem, which happens to be the turbo plumbing, unfortunately, which has to be redone. This will be, well, the third time I believe I've had to redo it, and well, luckily for movie magic, it will be, well, skipped around quite a lot for you guys, so that way you're not watching something that's been done already a bunch of times. So there are a few things that I did do to kind of help that, because unfortunately it wasn't just the plumbing that was the issue, it was also the wheels were a little too big, and well, that's where this little tool comes in handy, the belt sander. So this is why, well, I kind of like this thing, because it saves a lot of time on belt sanding, because for one, I wasn't happy with the roof line either, so we're going to take that and narrow it down just a little bit. And with the help of some movie magic, you also will get to skip about a day's worth of work, unfortunately, so that's why I'm a little behind schedule. This thing is nearly finished, though, at this point, luckily, so then we'll be moving on to the Mustang project. And if you're curious as to what the Mustang's going to look like, well, check out the links in the post description below. There you'll see, well, links to not only the Skyline project, but as well as the concept drawing for the Mustang, as well as a few of my actual cartoon animations. Anyways, continuing on with the Skyline build here, the next thing we're going to do is narrow down these tires, essentially cut off the back half quite a bit, narrowing them down, unfortunately, a little bit. But unfortunately, it's kind of a necessary evil due to the fact that, well, I kind of want to be able to have a really big, like, turning radius on this car because, well, drift car. So, therefore, we're going to narrow things down for the sake of, well, animation future shots, because this thing will look pretty cool from a front end view with the tire basically nearly sticking out almost 90 degrees is kind of the goal in the future. And then essentially what we're going to do to kind of help even out the space after narrowing them down is, well, use wire insulation. Just take that off some 10 gauge wire, strip that, and slide it onto the actual spinning rod that, well, turns the actual wheel as well as spins the front wheel. So therefore, it basically sits out a little bit further and isn't going to slide into, well, your mechanical components that we're basically trying to avoid and are causing the problems in the first place. And then once those are in place, we're going to, well, skip along to basically getting the actual turbo plumbing redone for the third time. Luckily for you, the viewers, it goes by pretty quickly. Unfortunately for me, the craftsman, it does not. It took a while, but nowhere near as long as, well, the previous 2 times that I've done it, because, well, I've done it a few times at this point. I now know what the issue is, and considering we have pretty much all the parts in place at this point, it's a little easier to work with than, well, the guessing game that I was playing before, essentially. Then once all the steering components, or, well, steering problems, I should say, are essentially solved, then we can move on to, well, the pre-assembly, which is basically putting all the tiny little parts I've built from previous videos onto the car and, well, making this RB26 a permanent part of the actual Skyline shell. And, well, putting this thing together, and not too long from now, it should be in the background there with those little cars. And, well, I would definitely enjoy doing some donuts with it, so once I'm done this thing, there will probably be a sneak little animation for the last video if I do have some extra time. It doesn't take too long to do some animations with the cars in comparison to some of the other projects I've done, and I haven't done an animation in a while, and I plan on doing one soon. But unfortunately, I'm a pretty busy guy, and, well, this Skyline has proved to be a bit of a challenge more than normal, mainly because of all the turbo plumbing and stuff like that, plus the, well, rather large steering in comparison to some of my other cars in the past. But it's all a learning curve, and now that it's over with, there's a few things I'm definitely going to be doing different on the next car, therefore making things a little easier on myself and making hopefully the process a little bit faster. And as always, if you enjoyed the content as well as the hard work that I put into all this little, well, clay world, or car clay world, I'm not sure what exactly to call it yet at this point. It's still obviously in the making, pun intended, but if you enjoy the content, be sure to smash that like button, comment below what you think of the project, perhaps leave a suggestion for either this car or the Mustang, or depending on which video you skipped on, leave a comment on the, well, Mustang drawing. That would also help that one because, well, generally I kind of base things off views, and, well, In this case, the Skyline won in comparison to the Mustang, so that's why I built the Skyline first. And perhaps consider subscribing if you're new and have your, well, bell notifications turned on so you don't miss any new content. And for all you, well, regular viewers, this time I did not forget to put Milton the Moose in. I'm pretty sure I did forget to put him in my last video. And for you new people, well, there's a little challenge with my videos. Essentially, just look for the little mascot or moose that will just kind of pop up on, well, screen at some point in the background. And if you timestamp correctly exactly when he shows up, you will get a shout out and, well, your comment pinned at the top of the comment section. Good luck to you viewers, and, well, here's a hint. If you've made it this far, he's already come and gone. So you might want to just rewind a little bit and he should be there. So good luck. Anyway, enjoy the video. I will talk to you towards the end and give you a quick build rundown what we're going to be doing next time on the Clay Skyline, which, well, probably might be the last episode or the second last episode. We'll see how things go this week. Anyway, take care, dear viewer. We're going to first start off with, well, doing a new strut tower bar. Well, for one, I kind of broke the old one, and, well, secondly, it didn't exactly work very well with the hood alignment. So what we're going to do is basically design a different one, bending the armature wire essentially all the way to the back, touching the firewall, connecting the strut tower bars essentially together, as well as together to the actual firewall, being, well, actually probably a better strut tower brace than what we originally had before, as well as it looks a lot better and it, well, functions and actually makes the hood able to close instead of sitting awkwardly on top of, well, the strut tower bar. Plus, it only makes sense to get all of the little mechanical components out of the way first, basically before adding all the plasticine, because once you start doing that, well, your time handling it is kind of limited because the clay gets warm and then it starts losing its shape. Not only that, well, your hands also have to be extremely clean during that entire process, and any cross-contamination with different colors of clay basically means you have to wash your hands in between every single color swap. So in order to avoid that, I generally try to do, well, all the little mechanical components first, and then, well, obviously add in the plasticine layer very last. And then once this little strut tower bar is all done being made, we can throw it in the oven at 275 degrees Fahrenheit or 135 degrees Celsius, which is what I use all my temperatures at for my oven baked clay. and then glue it, paint it in place, and then once that's done, we can move on to adding the red plasticine, which is my personal favorite step of, well, these little clay cars, mainly because, well, for one, it means you're close to the end of the actual project, and two, well, I personally really like plasticine and have been playing with it for probably 25 plus years at this point. Way more than, yeah, I've done just about anything else in my entire life, so yeah, I'm quite comfortable working with that stuff, and I do find it a lot of fun. The oven-baked stuff I don't mind as much, but it can be a little tedious in comparison to the plasticine. However, the nice thing about the oven-baked stuff is that, well, once you bake it, it basically retains its shape forever. However, plasticine tends to, well, stay soft. And one thing that I must admit is very handy for, well, this process is having a pasta roller, so that way you can roll out nice even sheets for your clay cars, and, well, that way it minimizes the amount of time you have to rake and, well, make everything nice and even on the actual body. That way you can just, well, run it through a pasta roller, stick it on, and make sure your layers are basically, well, retained to the actual body shape. Now, at this point, there really isn't too much for me to commentary on, apart from, well, cut your strips and press them onto the body, and then just kind of lightly shape them and cut them into, well, the according shapes needed for whatever body panel you're essentially working on. It's fairly straightforward for sculpting stuff when, well, tools will be coming in handy, obviously, but the main part of this one will be a lot of your hands. But the other tools that I'll be using will be a small scalpel, a little rake, and, well, probably using a lot of rubber sculpting tools for those finer details to help, well, clean things up where your fingers basically can't get. And the other big thing I would basically emphasize on is make sure your hands are clean. Now, this was kind of an important step for me, mainly because, well, I work trade jobs during the day mostly, so my hands get pretty dirty. Plus, this video was a little uploaded later than usual due to the fact that my, well, daily driver was having some issues, so I had to fix the brakes this weekend and do a whole bunch of other work on it because, well, it's springtime where I am in Canada, so things are actually kind of, well, nice out. It's no longer minus 40, so I can be outside and work on vehicles again, so that's kind of nice. So I do apologize for the later than usual upload, but we're back to normal scheduling probably this week, I'm hoping, and this car should be pretty much done at this point. During this video I do not finish it, unfortunately. I was kind of hoping I would have more time than I did, but unfortunately life happens, and, well, the little clay sculpture had to be kind of put off to the side for a bit. Anyway, if you are just tuning into this, well, channel, be sure to check out the links in the post description. There you will find, well, links to my other car builds, as well as the build to this little clay car, as well as some animations as well. If you appreciate all my hard work that I put into these little clay sculptures that are literally rolling sculptures, be sure to hit that like button, comment below what you think of the project, perhaps consider sharing with your friends, and, well, subscribe if you're new. That would be awesome too, to get my subscriber count just up a little bit more, because, well, this stuff takes a lot of time. It generally takes upwards of about 100 hours or so to make one of these little clay sculptures, so it takes a lot of time and dedication, and, well, I've been doing it for a long time, and there's a lot of text to help you along with the tutorial as well. So at that point, if you're, well, curious on how things are done, just follow along with the text and perhaps sculpt along with me, because I know there's a few of you out there who are making little clay car model engines, which is pretty cool. I'm glad that I've, well, made a slight inspiration on the car world, and people are doing things perhaps a little bit different than just, well, buying the regular car model kits that you get, because, well, it's a little more fun to be able to sculpt whatever it is you essentially want. That is the one, well, benefit to doing this. Yes, you do have to take a lot of time and effort into sculpting your project, but in the end, you can make it however you like it. Now, be sure to keep your eyes peeled for Milton the Moose as well, and for those of you who are new or perhaps just tuning in, he is the goofy-looking moose character, which is essentially, well, the profile picture, for lack of a better term, for the YouTube channel. And for those of you who are aware, well, he generally just shows up during some time in the video, and if you timestamp correctly when he shows up, you will get your comment pinned at the top of the comment section, as well as a shout-out in the next how-to video. Speaking of which, congratulations to Tiger HD for, well, having very sharp set of eyes. Anyway, that's enough for me for now. I will talk to you towards the end of the video, giving you, well, a quick brief rundown on what we did during this video, during the build rundown, as well as what will be taking place next time. Anyway, thank you for watching. We're going to start off here by fixing some of those, well, ugly, bulky body lines here, particular between the door and, well, the rear quarter panel. It looks a little lumpy, so we're going to basically kind of, well, slick that back just a little bit and even things out. Now, purposely I did this car a little bulkier and lumpier than I normally would. Usually what I do with most of my cars is layer up little by little, but considering how time-consuming that process takes, it's a little faster to just kind of lump things on a little bit faster in, well, the grand scheme of things for the first layer, and then just kind of, well, get your basic shape, and then take it down little by little to get, well, the actual shapes you want out of the clay, instead of adding layers by layers by layers by layers. You get the point. Now, there are some, well, occasions where we're adding small little snippets of clay, obviously. You're never going to fully get rid of that step, I think, to be honest, but it does basically help out massively without having to do a bunch of different layers, without worrying about having different cross-contamination, because, well, the more you handle the clay, the more, well, dirt and various other things get pulled from your pores in your hands and get soaked into it, and it's just harder to keep your sculpture clean at that point, which can be rather aggravating. And, well, depending on what color you use, that, well, can be sometimes worse or better. White in particular was, well, a big headache, especially on that AE86, mixing it with, well, black as well. Those two are obviously complete polar opposites. So that was a bit of a headache. Luckily, this car is, well, a little more simple than that. It's all red. So there isn't really too much to worry about cross-contamination, apart from maybe a few minor areas, but the amount of contact that those will see is pretty much bare minimum. And if by chance you're just kind of tuning into this series, be sure to check out the links in the post description below, or better yet, go check out the channel and check out some of the other little clay car projects. Therefore, you're kind of a little bit more up to date on, well, how these little clay cars are made and essentially what these will be used for in the future. Stop motion animation projects. Now, I understand it has been a while since I've actually done a stop motion project. Unfortunately, I've been very busy this week. Exactly, well, hasn't been on my side. A lot of things were breaking, so I had to replace my welding helmet, had to replace a bunch of brake stuff on my daily driver. So it's been, well, hectic to say the very least. So that's kind of why, well, things haven't really been exactly up to, well, date or getting done as fast as I would like it, because, well, life sometimes just kind of gets in the way. And, well, that's kind of why I have a band-aid on my thumb for a good portion of this video, because, well, unfortunately, I did kind of hurt it while I was working on my brakes. Don't worry, it's nothing severe. I just wanted to make sure that it was covered up, just in case there were some other viewers on this platform that would perhaps be a little bit offended by a little scratch, even though it's barely nothing and doesn't really do much. But, in all honesty, the Band-Aid probably would look way worse, but whatever. At least that way it's covered up. It's a Band-Aid, not an open cut. And probably not the best thing to be mixing with plasticine. However, I've been playing around with this stuff for plenty of years, and, well, I've also had dogs consume a lot of it, and it obviously didn't hurt them in any sort of way, apart giving them, well, rainbow poops. That's not a suggestion for any of you kids. Do not start feeding your dog plasticine so you can get rainbow turds, as amusing as it is. That's not here what I'm suggested or here for. No rainbow turds. Only making clay projects with cars. Oh god, what have I done? Anyway, moving on from the subject of rainbow turds and perhaps moving on to something a little more sanitary. Probably going to start doing a storyboard for my next little animation, which I think will probably involve Scrat, because he's fairly easy to animate, and do just a quick little funny short involving him, well, versing my T-Rex-Sue. Obviously, things won't be quite to scale, because, well, a giant T-Rex full-size 1-to-1 would be pretty much impossible to work with in any sort of stop-motion format. It's just going to be a quick little cartoon where essentially his nuts is going to get smashed, and, well, Scrat's going to go all ninja mode on Sue, and we'll see what pursues from there. And if you have any suggestions, and, well, leave those in the comments below, and perhaps it'll get added into the storyboard, and you will get to see, well, what takes place in the actual animation. So be sure to subscribe if you're new, and have your post notifications turned on so you don't miss that. As for, well, what's going to be taking place during the rest of this build process, there's going to be a lot of raking, shaping, and adding and taking away clay, very obviously, which has been taking place for quite some time, and I've been kind of ranting on about other things like rainbow turds. Any rate, I wanted to start from the, problem area, which was kind of the back where I seemed to have the most, well, issues visually with body lines. So that way it gave me a good visual reference on how to basically shape the rest of the car working forward. So we started with the back end, then we're going to move on to the quarter panel, then obviously going to shape up the side skirts a little bit. We don't really do any of the door work here. There isn't really a whole lot to do, mainly because this car does have a slight wide body kit on it. Nothing too major, obviously, but just enough to kind of, well, obviously wanting to leave a layer behind on the door in particular. We'll probably work on that next time a little bit more, giving it obviously door handles and various other small little details, but that's obviously for a later episode. And obviously we still don't add any plasticine to the actual roof. And if you're curious as to why, well, I guess you're just going to have to go check out the old videos and, well, catch yourself up on the build process. Now, there's also a few other little things we're going to be doing other than working with plasticine just this video. We're going to work with a little bit of oven-baked clay, mainly because, well, adding those large layers of plasticine made, well, our exhaust tip kind of fall obviously way back, the little side dump exhaust you can see in the hole there, which we're going to start working on right now, basically just adding an extra little exhaust tip as well as extending that rear ducktail spoiler, so that way they're actually sticking through and not just kind of buried under a layer of plasticine. Any rate, that's going to do it for the commentary at this point, I would say. I'll talk to you towards the end of the video, giving you a quick build rundown on what, well, just kind of took place during this video, as well as what to look forward to on the next build on the little clay Skyline project, which I'm hoping, well, this series should be drawing to a close at this point. Now that we've pretty much added all the details on the body with this car, apart from the front end, which is the only part we don't actually get to during this process, spoiler alert. Any rate, pun intended, because we're kind of working on the spoiler there. Be sure to leave a like if you enjoy all the hard work that I put into these little rolling sculptures, as well as a comment below what you think of the project, perhaps a suggestion, although it is getting a little late in the build process series, because, well, this car was basically mostly made off comments, so it's pretty cool to have that, well, a car that's actually pretty much made, well, by me as well as the community itself that I have basically created on this little platform for myself. So thank you, my dear supporters and subscribers. I definitely would not be continuing this stuff without you. So again, thank you very much, and let me know what you think. And perhaps if you're new to, well, this program, be sure to hit that subscribe button and join the little car or clay car community, I suppose I should be calling it, and have your post notifications turned on. And be sure to keep your eyes peeled for Milton the Moose, and if you're new, he's, well, the goofy-looking moose character. That's kind of the profile picture for, well, the channel. And if you timestamp correctly when he shows up during the build process, you will have your comment pinned, as well as get a shout-out in the next how-to video. Anyway, good luck to your viewers. We'll first start off where we left off last time, just adding a couple extra layers of clay to the front bumper here. Now the important thing is obviously not to press too hard, but press hard in the right areas, so therefore, well, it's easy to trim off the excess, and we can kind of not lose our small little details that we've worked so hard on to, well, build up to this point, essentially. And then basically just working in sections and basically using your rubber sculpting tool. If you have one, comes in handy. If not, well, you can use other various little toothpicks and stuff like that just to kind of work in the seams and make sure that everything is, well, nice firmly attached. And then the fun part of working in the tiny little slots where you basically just have to kind of guess where things are and stab through and hope for the best. Luckily, I was fairly accurate with my stabbies, and, well, we got the exact slots that we needed without actually having to fill in any extra holes. Then we're just going to add on an extra little layer to the bottom splitter here, and move on to one more last step before adding on the tiny little detailed parts. Ah yes, thank you Mini-Me for holding that. I will take that off your hands. And then use this mini rake to add in the final details here to the bottom splitter. Now it's time to add some of the small detail parts. By that I mean, well, the rear taillights, as well as the exhaust tips, as well as the rear spoiler extensions, and a few others, so we're just going to throw those on real quick. Now, I do apologize for being a little out of schedule for, well, my regular viewers here. Usually I like to post on the weekends, but unfortunately, things just didn't really add up to that actually happening. There was, well, a few different things that happened. Unfortunately, my little pug had some eye issues, so there was some vet appointment and extra eye drops that I had to attend to, as well some delays like, oh, I decided that these cars would look really good with a rear roof spoiler, so let's add that on and make more work for myself. Not to mention there was a decent amount of off-camera work during this video as well, because, well, I decided I wasn't happy with the front wheels, so I redid those, but I was going to save you, well, the viewers, the pain from watching me do that stuff again, and if you would like to see how it's done, be sure to check out a older video in the links below in the post description while I just pet my Skyline. Yes, who's a car? Yeah. Now, for those of you who are perhaps new to the channel, first off, be sure to hit that subscribe button and have that bell notification turned on so you don't miss any of the new videos that I'll be uploading. I will be working on some new cartoons soon here. Unfortunately, haven't had a whole lot of time for stop motion animation because that takes a large amount of time, and I'll probably work on one shortly after this clay car is done. Would kind of like to get this thing out of the way. Any rate, for those of you who are new, there's a little challenge during my videos where it gives you a chance to get a shoutout as well as your comment pinned at the top of the comment section, where if you spot Milton the Moose, who's essentially the goofy looking moose character, as the profile picture for the channel, and if you timestamp correctly when he shows up, you will have your comment pinned at the top of the comment section, as well as get a shoutout in the next how-to video. So good luck, dear viewers, well, new and old, whoever you may be. So, no shoutout during this video, unfortunately. And by chance, if you enjoyed the content and appreciate all the hard work that I put into these rolling sculptures, be sure to leave me, well, a little thumbs up. You know, that means a lot to a guy like me over here who's spending hours and hours playing with clay. It takes a lot of time and effort to make this stuff, so definitely would be highly appreciated, you know. Definitely make my day. Hit that thumbs up button. Thank you. You know, or leave a comment in the comment section below there. They're going, hey, you know, I really appreciate all that effort you put into that hood that you're probably never really going to use because you don't like covering up your engine bays because you put a lot of time and effort into those engines inside there that rock back and forth because it's kind of a crying shame to cover it up during the animation process. But we're going to put all that effort in to make sure it's perfect anyway. Now it is time to, well, start a bit of a painting frenzy and make sure that everything is nice and smooth. Get our rear roof spoiler painted up as well as our rear ducktail spoiler extension that we did in just the previous few frames there, as well as touch up that hood so it doesn't look like, well, a auto body disaster, essentially, with a bunch of weird different colors going on there. Just looking real ugly. Now it's time to paint up the rear taillights, which I must admit are fairly iconic among Skylines in particular for just having 4 round circles. Fairly simple, but honestly probably looks really good. So in just about every model, the only one that I think it may look a little awkward on is the R35 personally. R34 being my personal favorite, but the R32 and R33 are, well, close second. Actually, scratch that and move all those previous Skylines back just one, because my favorite is, well, the one from the 60s, the old boxy style. Yes, it's a little odd in comparison to some of these other newer models, but personally, I like the old school body look more than anything, not to mention, I think it would be, well, a lot faster than some of the other newer models if you perhaps took one of the new drivetrains and shoved it inside that tiny little car, because, well, there's not a whole lot of car there to exactly move, so I think that would be definitely a cool project, and perhaps in the future we'll make a little clay version of that. Hello everyone, and well, it's been a while since I've actually made a YouTube post, so I do apologize for the slight delay, but I mainly wanted to get this clay car project out of the way. So we're going to first start off by doing the rear taillights here and cutting out some bigger holes so they can be sunk in and more level with the actual trunk of the car. Now this is a fairly easy process. Just take a scalpel and, well, remove the extra layers of plasticine down to the actual base frame, which is, well, oven clay. You will feel the difference with the knife once it hits a solid part. Obviously that's the oven base. Then once you have your holes cut out, well, then you gently place your taillights in the holes, placing them just enough so they stick out a little bit but not too much, just so it's kind of like ovaled out like the actual car. And then, well, do some adjustments on the actual level between the bottom half and the top half, because you want to make sure everything's very precise, because, well, with cars, if you're out even just a little bit, the line looks, well, terrible at that point. Then, speaking of lines, now we're just going to add some of the added detail that, well, the R32s in particular have with their straight oriented taillights, and just making sure that everything's sectioned off with our little plasticine knife there. Now moving on to the actual plate, which is, well, kind of a custom order. I had a little request from Tiger HD, who I kind of, well, owe a shout out to from spotting Milton the Moose on a previous episode, which I totally forgot about. So he made a suggestion on making the plate, which you will see later on. At the moment, we're going to make some tow hooks, though, which are just some curled up pieces of armature wire, fairly simple. Now, the rear spoiler needed some touch-ups. Now, for that, what I decided to do, instead of, well, redoing the entire thing, I took a little bit of, well, sandable primer and put it on the end of a paintbrush. Do not use a good paintbrush for that, because you will ruin it. And then just basically filled in the cracks and then sand it down so it was nice and even without having to, well, throw the entire sculpture in the oven for just one little part. And speaking of little parts, R32s have a tiny little light in between the two rear tail lights. Now that's an easy way to spot a R33 between an R32. R33 will have the tail lights or the little signal light at the bottom half of the rear tail lights. Now, which brings us back to the rear portion of the car, which is a license plate custom saying Pizza Boy. Now the real question is it a Gallo 12 or a Gallo 24? Now we're going to add in some tow hook spots for later, and then paint up the, well, headlights and then bounce around to the front bumper. Oh my god, doing the voiceover for this is not exactly easy. Being the final episode, we're kind of bouncing around a little bit more than normal, mainly because, well, we gotta make sure the entire car is show-worthy, so we're not generally focusing on one area like we normally would. We're kind of bouncing around a lot, so this isn't exactly easy for me to catch up. So obviously we're fixing the front end lines up here a little bit before installing everything, because once everything is installed, it becomes a little difficult to work with. It's a little easier to basically have everything cleaned and prepped up without having to work around the oven-baked parts because, well, things smear and stain, and it's a little harder to just work around more things, and if you have less things in the way, it just makes more sense. Speaking of things getting in the way, the reason I'm kind of behind schedule with this car and the build was, well, a lot of off-camera work, and I wanted the car finished. Secondly, I have, well, several big gardens, not all of which will be featured like I mentioned at the beginning of the video. There's a couple gardens that I have that are basically flower gardens that I kind of, well, just decided to showcase the little car off and risk hundreds of hours of work by putting it in the sun. However, it did kind of pay off, got some cool extra shots, and, well, brought it back inside to, well, have a mini car show as well. So you have that to look forward to at the end of the video. And as always, if you appreciate all the hard work that goes into these little clay sculptures, be sure to smash that like button, because, well, it definitely means a lot to a guy like me who spends a lot more time inside than I would like because, well, I got gardens to work on and trying to balance between a 9 to 5, a garden, and a YouTube channel with sculpting and stop motion is, well, a handful to say the least. Not to mention I have a small petting zoo as well with 2 dogs, 2 cats, and fish that need to, well, be vacated to the pond outside, which I also have to redo this year. Busy guy, unfortunately, but I somehow managed to, well, get a vast majority of things done, just a lot of sleep is generally lost. At any rate, be sure to keep your eyes peeled for Milton the Moose. Hopefully your eyes are a little less tired than mine, and just to give you a little hint, Milton the Moose is that goofy-looking character that is used as the profile picture, and if you're this far in the video, chances are he's already appeared on screen, so you might want to rewind a bit and, well, timestamp correctly when he shows up on screen exactly, and you will get a shout out in the next how-to video, and get your comment pinned at the top of the comment section. I am not retaking that. That was a few screw-ups, unfortunately. At any rate, good luck to your viewers, and hopefully you are, well, a little more on the ball than me with my voiceovers. And speaking of, well, being on the ball, I decided to, well, make a whole lot of extra work for myself during this video and make extra parts because, well, things weren't good enough apparently, so I decided to add a little bit extra detail to those side skirts and give them an extra little oven-baked clay piece just to kind of give it more of a race car feel. And, of course, well, going through headlights, 2 or 3 sets of them, unfortunately, because I was really unsatisfied with how the front end was looking at the beginning, so a majority of the off-camera work went here. And, well, the one scene in particular here, which we'll cut to right away, you'll probably see a massive difference between the front end from now and then after because, well, I just decided to redo things off-camera because it was a lot less work than doing it on camera, and yeah, it was just frustrating, and I wanted to make sure everything was done correctly because I'm a big Skyline fan and wanted things done right. And speaking of which, seeing how we went through 3 sets of headlights, we decided to stick with the original ones that I made in the first place. Because why do all that extra work for no good reason? But at least it made me decide which ones I actually liked. So we're going to finish coloring those in and then go over the entire surface of the body, making sure everything is clean, while we still don't have a, well, plasticine roof on the thing. So it gives my hands an extra little bit of space to put, well, on the car before, well, I don't have that anymore. And because essentially with plasticine, it's always soft, and if you overwork it and over touch things, you're going to start losing detail, and just the heat from your hands will actually start melting it over time. So this is part of the reason why things took a little longer than expected. You kind of have to be very careful on every single little step, not to mention, yeah, you're going to have to be doing things maybe 2 or 3 times over, depending on how detailed you want your car or whatever it is you might be working on. And I may as well throw this in there just because some of you might be curious as to what tool I'm using in particular for scraping and cleaning off the car. It's referred to as a rake, and you can get several different styles, small and big, and well, preferably for a step like this, you want to use the largest rake possible so you leave less tool marks, as well, you just scrape off the most amount of dirt that you can possible without having to put too much energy that you've already put into the sculpture. Now we're going to make a tiny little, well, for lack of a better term, grill brace, because there's a little small piece that goes in between the 2 headlights there, which we're just going to, well, wrap in plasticine and use some very thin armature wire just so it has a little bit of extra support so it's not going to fall off or melt away. And then we're going to add a little bit more plasticine to the actual doors, mostly in the middle, and then kind of, well, blend it into the rest of the car, working it from side to side to kind of give it a high point straight in the middle, just to give it a little bit more of a curve, because, well, imports in particular tend to be a lot less boxy than some of the muscle cars that I'm used to working on, so we want to make sure things are a little bit more oblong and oval shaped in comparison to, well, nice and boxy. And now it's time to touch up the windows. And then slide in those little tow hooks we made earlier in the little tow hook slots that we also punched into the back bumper earlier in this video. Be sure to just use a little bit of glue so they don't fall off on you. Now the super annoying part, carving out a plasticine door handle, because this car does not have sticky outy door handles, as well my grandpa used to call door handles that stuck out, so that was kind of a pain in the butt. Now we are on, well, one of the final steps, adding the rear view mirrors, because, well, I don't like adding these things on too early because they kind of tend to get in the way, and if you move your hand wrong, you will rip the mirror off, then you're doing some more rework, which has already taken place lots on this car. Now we're on, well, one of the final steps, which I thought was going to be the final step, not gonna lie, when I first started it, doing the roof line. But unfortunately, I got picky once I added the plasticine to the actual roof, and decided I wanted to redo the rear window. But luckily for you viewers, what took me nearly, well, probably almost a night or a good evening to do takes mere seconds for you, and we'll skip right over that to beauty shots, because, well, this car project has gone long enough. So this brings us to the very last picky step, where essentially I just made a big plate to slide in place of the old window, just so it sticks out a little bit past the actual pillars of the window, because Skylines will have a window that sticks out just a little bit past the actual pillars, and of course I didn't notice that till the very end. But luckily, I've caught it before the project was completely finished, and then decided to add a piece of pizza for a drift toy, which brings us to the final beauty shot. So here we are at my flower garden, and I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, be sure to smash that like button if you haven't already, comment below what you think of the project, share with friends, and perhaps consider subscribing if you're new. Anyway, thank you for watching, dear viewers, and, well, we'll be on to the next project very soon, which will... Anyway, thank you for watching to the very end. Be sure to leave a like if you haven't already, comment below what you think, share with friends, and perhaps consider subscribing if you're new. Anyway, that's all from me. Till next time, take it easy.